This is like what we understand to be Star Wars. Like the idea that like that only came from George Lucas, that only George Lucas holds the key for what we understand to be Star Wars is just untrue. And I think the prequels are an excellent example of that. I mean, when you're hiring a director, that everyone is sitting in there waiting for George Lucas and not for the person who's going to know to hire Ralph McQuarrie, that's the problem. That's the misogyny and the problem with the auteur myth, because they're not thinking this is the person that will hire the right people and this is the person that will be able to create the lookbooks and direct people to get them to that place. They're just thinking, do you have all the answers? And the truth is that nobody does, and anybody that says they do is lying.
Hello, I'm Cinemod470, and The Acolyte is terrible.
Coming to bed, honey?
Yes, dear.
It's poorly written, it can't understand the basic progression of time, it has too much redundant, expositive, and repetitive dialogue, it can't tell a story with multiple points of view, and the characters are either inconsistent, one-dimensional, or both. Personally, I was going to skip the show entirely, but I had just wrapped up my last video around the show's premiere, and if I want to get out of the salt mines of Cyberstan, I'm going to need to add more content. The Acolyte is set roughly 80 years before The Phantom Menace, where a mysterious assassin has a grudge with multiple Jedi. It is then revealed that this assassin was a young girl named May, who was part of a false cult of witches with her twin sister Osha. When the Jedi came to their planet to investigate a possible vergence in the Force, they discover the twins and investigate the cult. When they discover the twins were born from the virgins, a fight breaks out which kills the witches, and the Jedi cover it up and take Osha with them to train as a Jedi, while May is presumed dead. Osha joins the murder investigation and discovers that May is training under a Sith, and later discovers that her former Master Sol killed her mother, and she kills him, joining the Sith as his new acolyte.
Once we kidnap the princess, we can force her father, King Roland, to give us the combination to the air shield, thereby destroying planet Druidia and saving planet Spaceball.
Everybody got that?
The first sign of bad writing is when characters have conversations about knowledge they already know just to clue in the audience. And this redundant and repetitive exposition is layered throughout the series.
You lost your entire family. Your mothers, your sister, your village all died in the fire before Master Sol brought you into the Jedi.
You and Master Indara were friends.
Yes, I was sad to hear she came to a violent death. Indara and I saved her from a terrible fire on Brandok.
I remember.
She saw us as her protectors.
She wants to kill 4 Jedi stationed on Brandok 16 years ago. Indara, Torben, Kelnaka, and you.
I told you this planet would be safe haven for our coven.
You don't like me. You think my campaign for an external review of the Jedi is a personal vendetta.
The characters never show how they feel through body language or visual storytelling. They just explain their feelings, and when characters are not fully explaining themselves, they're being incredibly vague to force intrigue.
You speak as if you were a Jedi.
I was. A long time ago.
I've never heard of you.
It was a really long time ago.
The Old Republic cinematic trailers are great examples of the show don't tell rule. They had the bare minimum dialogue and yet managed to tell a story, showcase character relationships and personalities through the visuals and physical acting. I'm not the biggest fan of The Force Awakens, but somehow Rey's introduction was better. We get an understanding of Rey's daily routine and what her goals are without having any spoken dialogue or exposition. When it comes to Osha, all her goals and desires are explained verbally, mostly by other people. We never have a binary sunset moment with her, and I don't just mean have a character looking at a sunset, I mean we never get that visual of witnessing her character wanting more than she has been given. We get a snippet when Osha watches Kalnaka working on the speeder with fascination, which ties into her future mechanic occupation. But that's all we get. Her character motivations, as well as the side characters and antagonists, are explained to the spectators instead of shown, and they're not always consistent, but we'll get into that later. One example is Sol stating to Indara that he has a connection to Osha, even though all the spectators have seen is him looking at her from a distance and offering her a lightsaber after a brief introduction. But that's the thing, everyone has to say what they're thinking and feeling because the directors and writers can't think of a clever way to show what the characters are thinking and feeling. The writers have also shown a clear lack of ability to tell a story with multiple points of view. When Osha is arrested for May's crime and the prisoners escape, Osha lets one of the prisoners out, even though we just established that he had a parasite that was used on violent offenders. That prisoner then goes on a rampage and steals the last escape pod, and Osha is left on her own. It was intended to be her save the cat moment, to make her appear selfless to the audience and the Jedi, and is viewed by the Jedi as a good deed. But honestly, that blunder makes Osha look stupid. If she didn't want to leave him behind to die, fine, she could have just dragged him to the escape pod. In reality, Osha should appear as the most dangerous person in the galaxy, since the escaped prisoners all say that she broke them out of prison and there were no other witnesses to dispute that, aside from the madman who had a parasite to keep him unconscious. And the fact that Osha would take off the parasite after being told it was used on dangerous criminals and it messes with their brain shows Osha being incompetent. There are also multiple instances where characters have knowledge about the plot when they shouldn't. Like Vanestra stating that Osha's believed involvement in Endara's murder needs to be kept quiet, yet the prisoners accompanying Osha all know why she's with them. When Sol realizes Osha is actually May, he immediately knows Osha is with Kymir and doesn't go down to look for her. And Kymir somehow knows about how Osha was falsely accused and that she was maybe starting a relationship with Jackie. And speaking of points of view, the writers mishandle characters by not giving them enough depth. Though interviews with the creator Leslie Headland illustrate there being some deep ideas, they don't show on screen. When May kills Endara, we don't have any emotional connection to her. We don't spend enough time to get to know her, or why we should care that she died. And they wasted a good actress to be fridged. They might as well have used a stunt performer to play the role. The fight scene might have actually been better to look at. Karnaka, the first on-screen Wookiee Jedi, also gets fridged because the show didn't have the budget for a fight scene, a budget of $180 million. And when we do see him fight, Karnaka is severely underpowered, since Wookiees are known for their intense strength. And it could have been interesting to learn about how a species that is known for their intense emotions struggle with keeping a life of discipline. Torben just wants to go home. That's about it. That's his whole deal. We don't get any more details. He doesn't have any family he wants to get back to, or an assignment he would prefer to do. He just wants to go home. And Torben probably suffers the most in the show. He gets his mind dominated and physically mutilated, and neither add to his character motivation. He then spends 10 years in deep meditation, gets terrible hair and makeup to make him look old, and then kills himself with poison when May asks him to. Jecki and Yord are the two constant side characters, and they are one-dimensional. Yord is the tough guy who follows the Jedi code to a T, and Jecki is young and tech-smart, and that's all we get aside from how brutally they get murdered. Yord is presented to be an old friend to the protagonist Osha, and Jecki is the new apprentice to Osha's old master Sol. Endara, Karnaka, and Torben were all the first Jedi that Osha met. But none of them expand their relationships in any meaningful way that makes the audience care about them when they die. And finally, there's Sol, played by Lee Jong-jae, and he puts in the most amount of effort in this entire cast. I mean, he learnt English for this role. He's introduced as a Qui-Gon Jinn kind of Jedi, as he follows the code but also strays away from it because he has the self-awareness to know its imperfections. But as the series progresses, the writers paint his actions, though well-intentioned, in an unfavourable light, and they constantly undercut him to portray those actions as a justified reason for his death. When we first see him, he is the loving father figure who cares for Osha's well-being and wants her to reconcile her feelings with her sister. And by the final episode, all those paternal instincts are absent, and all he cares about is proving that Osha and May were born from a virgins, and he lets Osha kill him while the confirmed Sith Lord is still alive and standing behind her. And did I mention that this is a murder mystery show? Because it's not. Sure, there's murder, but the characters don't really solve any mysteries, since the answers are revealed not from finding clues and asking questions, but via force visions, flashback episodes, and bad exposition. Attack of the Clones had a better mystery plot.
Apathy is death.
Apathy is death.
Statement: apathy is death.
When immersing an audience in fiction, the tiny details such as time, distance, clothes, or visual effects can influence how much they care about what they're watching. Time and distance are important for immersion, world building, and tension, especially for a murder mystery, and the writers either don't understand these concepts or don't care to. Osha has no alibi for the murder, but is believed to have managed to get from one part of the galaxy to the next in the span of at most 12 hours, and no one asks questions, when hyperspace travel has been depicted as something that takes days to make. And this isn't the only instance of hyperspace inconsistency. The Jedi managed to capture the escaped prisoners before Osha freezes to death. May, Chimera, and the Jedi managed to get to Kalnaka's hideout around the same time, even though the Jedi had to stop by Coruscant first. Sol and May get through a 3-hour trek and remain on the ship for what looks like a day, yet Chimera and Osha are already on a new planet. And just as Sol leaves, the Jedi from Coruscant arrive. And it's not just hyperspace, it's real time as well. How did Osha get to Torben before the rest of the group? Did they take the scenic route? They were all going to the same place and knew there was a major situation. Why wouldn't they have taken the fastest route? When Osha stuns May, she wakes up within 10 minutes completely conscious. Yet when Sol is stunned, he's out long enough for May to talk to Osha, have a brief battle, cut her hair, and change her clothes. In episode 1, a fire starts while Osha is working on the outside of the ship, in a vacuum.
How did this happen?
That's a very good question.
Osha then uses a fire extinguisher to cut off the fire's oxygen, in a vacuum.
That just raises further questions.
Now, defenders of the Acolyte have been saying that this is an invalid criticism, as fire appearing in Star Wars space is nothing new. But usually when we see it, it is during a climactic battle, or during some great visual spectacle, so the audience is enjoying the scene too much to really be bothered by it, which is what we call suspension of disbelief. However, the reason I want to draw attention to this scene, specifically the mass outrage of the scene, is to illustrate that most of the audience's disbelief is no longer suspended, which is pretty bad considering we're 10 minutes into the first episode. And if that didn't break people's immersion, it was May not changing her appearance when her identity is discovered. I mean, Christ! Her clothes make her the most conspicuous assassin ever. Or when the characters never change their clothes to match the environment's temperatures. Or when May cuts her hair with a lightsaber and Sol doesn't smell it burning. Or when these trees cut with a lightsaber fall in the opposite direction of the angle it was cut. Or when the child actors who are supposed to play identical twins don't look identical because Leslie Headland couldn't tell them apart.
I actually auditioned several identical twins, and it was, I cut them together in making the decision. And with identical twins, it was very difficult to tell them apart, really to track those types of the performances that you're talking about, the differentiation between the two of them.
It's the little details that cause the death by 1,000 cuts, or in this show's case, 1,000 cuts and 9 deep stab wounds.